Funyuns are
What have I
great.
got?
Yeah.
I am actually at 6 o'clock in the evening. It's definitely aperitivo time, and I'm in the south of Italy, in Puglia. So I'm eating this, which is aperitivo speciality called tarellini, very very tasty. And I actually have an Apfelschorle, so that's a bit Germanic, at least, going on.
Wonderful. Sounds really tasty. So I'm going to give formal introductions now. Kate McIntosh is a Brussels-based artist who practices across the boundaries of performance, theater, and installation. Her works often focus on the physicality of both performer and audience, the manipulation of objects and materials, and the development of direct relations with and between audience members. Kate's practice is guided by her ongoing fascinations with the misuse of objects, playfulness with the public, a love of theatrical images, and an offbeat humor. Originally from New Zealand and trained in dance, since 2004, Kate has developed an internationally recognized body of stage and transdisciplinary work, which tours extensively in Europe as well as to Asia, Oceania, and the Americas. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks very much.
No problem. Calcano Cullen, Cal, as many in Cincinnati know her, believes in the power of art to create empathy and positive social change. To make that belief a tangible reality, she co-founded the socially minded art center Wave Pool and is the growing organization's executive director. What started as a way to better support artists in Cincinnati has quickly grown to support an array of community groups by pairing them with both local and world-renowned artists. The majority of Cal's work involves listening deeply to both neighborhood and artist needs and finding ways to creatively pair them in order to turn deficits into assets. Welcome, Cal.
Hi.
Thank you. So everyone, I'm going to turn off my video and audio and pop back in about 1/4 till. When you have questions, please put those into the chat or the Q&A so I can moderate those a little later on in the hour. Thanks a lot. Feel free to begin.
Funny.
Thanks.
Hi,
Hey,
Kate. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks. I'm very good. I'm sad not to be there because on Wednesday, work table opened. Yes, I'm very curious to know how it's going. And maybe you have been down there. Maybe you can tell me.
I have. Yeah, I got to go yesterday afternoon. And I got to experience it with a friend, Mark DeYoung, who he's an artist as well, and does a lot of things with building. So it was really great to have his perspective and mine. It was amazing. It was great. So I'll tell you about the experience if you want, what I did. So I picked a ceramic bunny off the shelf, and he's just like a very joyful looking knickknack. And I have to say I was surprised, like when I selected the ceramic piece, I thought for sure I would take so much pleasure in just smashing this thing with a hammer. But when I got into the room with all of the tools, I felt some like trepidation about it. I was like, oh no, like I can't actually destroy this sweet little ceramic bunny. And then I was like playing around with like, oh, maybe I'll just like take off a little piece of his limb, or like trying to figure out other ways. But in the end, I ended up just like mustering enough courage to smash him, which was not as joy-filled as I thought it would when I selected it. So, there's that. And then putting a piece together too was really, that was my favorite part. It was hard for me not to spend hours there. But I had I just have other appointments and things. So I was like, I'm on a time limit and I need to make this work. So I put together, I think it was a former globe, and it ended up being kind of like a magic wand, flattened earth thing. So I was pretty happy about. So I felt like the whole process was really enlightening about my own feelings about destruction and creation. And it got me thinking that, like, I often think about what the work that I do and the work that Wavepool does and the work that artists in general do is really this process of creating something from nothing, right? Like taking mud and turning it into ceramics, or raw pigment and turn it into a painting. But, you know, the truth is, like, we're not creating, it's not from nothing, really. Like, there's always something to start with, and something always has to be broken down in order to create anew. And so I feel like your piece, Work Table, really exemplifies this, and allows us to feel both this, like, grief of loss for this destruction, as well as the joy of creation, like, all at once. And I'm also thinking, like, you know, we've been doing a lot of this in the past year, like, because of COVID, because of the social dynamics and social justice issues that have, like, come to the surface in the past year. I feel like both individually and collectively, we've all been breaking down systems and trying to figure out how we can recreate them better. So I'm curious, like, how has this piece changed, or how have your thoughts about this piece changed in this, when presenting it now in this context?
Yeah. Hey, thanks for talking about your experience. I appreciate it a lot. It's funny, that thing about time, isn't it? Because I think the record is up around 5.5 hours that people have stayed in there. Yeah, but it's regularly, like, very long. Like, people get into a zone of what they're busy with and they just roll with it if they have the time, which is always really great.
It's amazing. So therapeutic too. Like,
yeah, or it's just the glue. I don't know what it is. Anyway, oh, it's such a good question about how the piece changes now in these times. I'm sort of hoping you can help me answer it, actually, because these are the first times that it has been showed since more than a year. I think the last time was in 2019, because we took a year off to do other things last year. And these, like, now to be able to do it from a distance where I didn't have to travel, because normally me or one of my team would go there and set it up and so on. So this is all very new for me. And I don't know really how it changes, to be honest. I mean, one of the reasons I made the piece was also in response to a very different situation, but maybe, well, I'll just describe that briefly. I made the piece in 2011, which is 10 years ago, and it was shortly after there was a very big earthquake in New Zealand, where I was living at the time. I mean, I'm from New Zealand and I was there at the time. And there was a very big earthquake in another city, not my city. And the whole city got really destroyed, and there was not a large loss of life, but the city was really destroyed. And in the time directly following this, and the week afterwards, in my city, where there are a lot of earthquakes and where we're always expecting the big earthquake, we were all going around in the days afterwards, like, full of these images from Christchurch, where it had happened. And also at every 10 minutes, you would think to yourself, okay, if it happens now, that window will fall in. I need to get under this table. I can't be under that. Like, this constant imagining of how everything could be really fully atomized and destroyed around you, like at any moment. This was very terrifying, but also in a strange way, very exciting, because after the terror comes this reflection that also the things that seem so sedimented and fixed and unchangeable, and maybe the things that you've been fighting to change, actually, those things can actually very naturally and very suddenly just get pulled apart. And that is a possibility. And this, of course, is very hopeful, I find, as well. But it does leave the problem of what next. And there I had again the image from the city where it's just rubble, and then the first person walks in and they pick up a bit of broken brick and they think, what shall I do? And then somebody else walks in and they have a discussion. And then there's this whole decision, like, do we try to rebuild the city as we remember it, as a kind of homage to the past and to our history? Do we sweep all of this debris into the sea and really start from scratch and ask ourselves, what do we need right now? Like what is needed today? Or do we just walk away from this and just go over the mountain to the next city and try to forget that we ever did anything here, you know? And so I tried, while I was working on Worktable, one of the reasons I was making it was this idea of sort of miniaturizing this process. So taking these objects that have very clear meanings and uses and taking away those meanings and uses by taking apart the object and then asking, okay, and then what? And I agree, it's very much the situation that we're in now, which is such a confusing situation too, because I find an earthquake much easier to understand than the situation we're in right now. And particularly because, as you say, there's been such a reveal of so many social and political problems that have really been there, but now become just heightened more and more. And there's this question also to myself of like, where are the skills to start remaking things that are obviously not functioning and have ground to a halt in a certain way? Yes, I don't know how much that answers your question.
No, absolutely. It's so good to hear the backstory for the piece. It makes complete sense. Like it's just, I can totally see that. And I love this idea that things that seem very fixed and immovable can break apart, you know, when the right moment or the right force is placed upon them. It's like everything can just open up, because I do feel like it's such a hopeful way of thinking about it, about destruction as a force that can open up possibilities.
Maybe what it brings to mind also when you're talking about it is that one of the things that one can be doing is cultivating a readiness for those moments, because I think in my mind too, I've spent a lot of energy on this idea of, okay, one has to fight for change and for things to change, but actually also there's a maybe more gentle or more beautiful also preparation, which is, okay, when that thing actually just suddenly comes apart, even before we were ready for it to come apart, how are we prepared to then move actually into the new space and into the new way of living, or the new way of organizing, or being in a community and so on? How are we ready to go with that actually? And
I think that I think about a lot of the work that I try and do in community building is about trying to build resiliency in communities, right? Like how can we I feel like arts education in general, it like brings on this empowerment and creative thinking that naturally builds self-reliance and self-resiliency. And I think that doing that as a whole for a community is really important, because it can prepare us without even knowing it, prepare us for so many of these, like when systems fail us, we know as a community, as a neighborhood, as a collective, that we will be able to thrive no matter what the outside circumstances are. And I feel like that's exactly what we should be doing as a way to prepare. It's not about having like 100 gallons of water in your basement. It's more about like knowing that you can figure out how to hydrate yourself in multiple ways.
Yeah, sure. But also communicate that with your neighbors and all of those communal aspects of it. I think maybe that's something that I think about also with Worktable. I'm curious your perspective is that it's an oddly kind of solo activity, I think, that Worktable proposes. Like you go in one person at a time, you're mainly alone through the whole thing.
Yep.
But also what happens is that because you take apart an object and then leave it there and someone else will pick it up and you pick up something that somebody else has left, I always think about it a little bit like you leave a problem for somebody else and you pick up a problem that somebody that you probably will never meet. somebody left that problem for you and you pick it up and you work further with it. And I think that there's something about that that appeals to me on a sort of community level as well, that that's often what we're doing is that we often are leaving problems also that we don't even maybe understand what they are, and hoping that somebody else will pick them up, and
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
vice versa.
Yeah, I thought about that as well, going through the piece about my connection to this stranger, to this person that I didn't know, just because I selected their piece and I've decided to take on their mess and make it my own. You know, but I think that is like what we're doing. I mean, we're dealing, at least like socially right now, we're dealing with issues that are, you know, from hundreds of years ago that have just never been addressed and healed properly. And it's on us to like make them right. So yeah, I think that it's really, it's poignant when you think about the work table in that way, as far as like, it's our responsibility to adapt, to grow, to, I don't know, to assist a mess, to fix it.
Yeah, to just keep
not yours.
At least keep it moving. I sometimes think about this idea that the objects that are in Worktable, that they are, of course, they're always temporary arrangements of materials, even if it comes in the form of a telephone, like the beautiful ones you have behind you. The materials that make the telephone are just temporarily in that state, and they will move on and they will circulate in the world in other ways, and probably mostly non-human contact ways. But I wanted to ask you actually, because I know that you also work with objects, and I remember you saying at some point that when we were discussing before, that the objects can work as a kind of I don't know, a center point around which people can contribute their stories and communicate with each other. I would be really happy to hear a bit about like your relation to working with objects and how you think about that.
Yeah. So as you can tell from my background, I'm attracted to nostalgic kind of communication devices. I feel like they're very sculptural, and that I often find it challenging to translate what's a very social practice about, and really the work is about getting people together and often conversing or working, and translating it into something that somehow looks and feels like art, or can take a physical presence. And so that's one of the reasons I'm attracted to them. But the other reason is that the things like typewriters and phones and old school calculators with the paper, people are really attracted to them. And it's almost like a novelty for younger folks, and it's nostalgia for older folks, that they want to interact. It's an invitation. Like you put a typewriter outside on a table and people cannot help themselves but to play with it. And I think that's what I want. I want people to feel like they want to play with these objects and contribute to it. So that's the main reason why I like using them, especially in like a gallery or social setting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a very physical aspect to it. I don't know, I think there's a different relationship between the body and those kinds of objects, in terms of just the manual engagement and also the sense of how they physically work. I mean, in Worktable, I also have always chosen for analog machines. There's nothing digital in there. And one of the reasons is the sense that when you take it apart, you can actually learn more about how it functions, because you find the spring and you see how it's connected to the wheel, and you can do the logic quite simply, which I'm not able to do with digital, but obviously other people can.
Yeah.
But for me, it also it has a lot to do with histories in objects as well. And I've noticed that people have very different relationships, basically, to objects. There are people who almost personify them and have an almost human or interhuman relationship with objects, and they find often work table extremely difficult because it's very violent in that sense. Others that tend to see objects in terms of value, like also really monetary value. Others really read them as historic and the stories that are inside. Others read them a lot to do with the labor and the materials that are there, like who made it, where was it made, where are the materials from, and so on. So there's these many layers to how the object, how a person decides to relate to the object.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I see younger people getting away from objects entirely. Like they don't want to inherit their mother's whatever crystal collection. And I find that really inspiring and probably in the end good for us as a culture to break away from this attachment to objects. But it does make me worry about museums and the preservation of objects, and just because I think, especially during the past year with COVID, we've quickly adapted to not needing that physical presence, not needing that that connection to the tactile. And I don't know what the future holds for objects and object collectors and object collecting institutions.
And maybe it'll just come back in a massive surge in that moment when people can become more physical, so with each other and in public space. Maybe it'll just become like a huge explosion of physical need that will come after, like once the regulations allow people again. I'm also very curious what will happen then.
Yeah.
It's sort of an explosion of sensuality and so on.
Right. Yeah, I do feel like we need it. To some degree. I mean, we definitely need human contact, but contact with objects, I think, there's something that you just cannot get from an image of an object or on a screen.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to, I know we talked briefly about hope earlier, but I wanted to ask you how hope plays into your work, and if that's something that's intentional, or if you're like naturally an optimist, or how that all like affects your work practice.
Yep. Oh gosh, it's such an interesting question. It's a word I would never use, and I don't know why. Not because I'm against it. I love that word and I love that idea. It's not something I consciously think about. I guess I'm basically an optimist. I guess maybe that's why I don't even think about it very much. It means it seems clear to me that given any real choice and any real information, everyone would always go for the thing that would be the healthiest and the heading towards the best solution. But I do have I think something that inspires me, and I think I can feel it in work table, is that I have a great apparently, I don't know where it comes from, but I have a great belief that people will take care given the chance. They'll take care of where they are and who they're relating to and what they're doing. And this is also something to do with a deep curiosity. So, and wanting to connect. So I have the feeling that in work table, but maybe also maybe more in some of my other pieces, and I'm very curious to hear how you think about this in your work, but I have the feeling often I am making conditions, I'm hoping to make conditions where people will feel comfortable enough to really connect with themselves and what they are doing, because these pieces often involve their own physical engagement. So I think a lot about what are the good conditions, like what kind of interaction do you need to have with somebody who guides you or who invites you? What would your relationship to instructions be, and what would make you feel that you have some agency and maybe some responsibility in the situation? Because I also think those two things, responsibility and agency, they also tend to bring out the best in people in terms of their and how much clarity do people need in a situation in order to feel that they trust it, and that therefore they can start to offer something to themselves, to each other, and so on. And I guess all of that comes from a deep hope that given the right conditions, people will want to do that, actually, and that's what they're here for. I think that's what comes to mind. Thank you for that question, because it's really not something I think about in those terms usually. Because you said earlier that in your work, you were very interested in this coming together and working. I think I understood what you were saying. And I guess maybe you think about these same things a lot.
I do. Yeah, I feel like this hopefulness and this optimism is a big part of at least the way that I approach projects and even approach life. Because I feel like I wouldn't be doing the work with communities if I didn't believe that, we are collectively, we have enough, we are enough, and we can do better with what we already have. I think about starting from a place of abundance already, like that. I think it really is just like a strong belief that there is enough. It's just a matter of bringing the right people to the table and thinking creatively together on how to make sure everyone feels safe and connected, and we have a strong social network and are able to build really healthy, vibrant places to live and work and grow and all that. Yeah.
Would you be willing to describe for me one of the works that you're thinking about that you've done?
Oh yeah, it's like, I mean, when I speak about my work, I mean it in a, like, it's hard for me to divide my own artistic practice with my arts administration with this organization. They're so intrinsically tied. And even though I do have my own art pieces, often, sculptures or installations or community projects, the bigger picture is all of these things combined with the organization and the neighborhood. So it's hard for me to talk about just one, but I suppose I could give you I'll give you one example so you get a sense because I do feel like it helps to have something tangible. So in 2016, I work with refugees a lot in southern Italy, actually, and in Sardinia. And in 2016, I came back from one of those trips and felt like, why do I have to go to Italy to work with refugees and do projects? And started working with immigrants here locally with an organization called Heartfelt Tidbits. And just started out as an art class. I was offering free art classes to this group of women who wanted to connect with each other and learn how to make things. And then they, started getting really good at what they were making and getting commissions. And then they were like, oh, well, we could use some extra money. We'd love to have our own space. And then the building next door became available. And so we were able to expand the program and give them their own space. And then it's just kind of like a lot of serendipitous moments that then evolve into what is now the Welcome Project, which fosters immigrant chefs to cook meals for the community. There's a fridge outside that actually Jordan, who worked on Worktable, is in charge of, Fridge ETC. That's like a free community fridge. There's exhibitions and a place for immigrant and refugee artists to sell their work and get help with branding. It's just become like this whole infrastructure of this supportive community. But it just starts with this optimism and this like belief that like we have the space, we have people interested in doing this, and we just need to like connect the dots. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Absolutely, it's fantastic to hear.
Okay,
Yeah, very much.
yeah.
And in that work, because I remember you were also just saying a bit earlier that in some ways it's a social work, which is made to look sometimes like it's also working in the arts, but maybe the more important factor is really the social work that's happening in it. And I don't know if this is even answerable, this question, but it always makes me very curious, like what are the what feels like the challenges that one keeps encountering in such situations, but also what are the maybe the aha moments where things start to flow or start to connect and so on. I don't know if can that be answered?
It's a constant, I just feel like it's a constant battle between like there's these sticking points where I'm not sure, I don't see the solution and everything's like very fuzzy, but then something, whether it's like, I often talk things out. I don't know if you're this way, but I'm a very like social, open, transparent person. So like, I'll like, you know, walk my dog and run into a neighbor and be like, I have this idea. And then somehow like this person will be like, oh, well, I actually have like an old tuba that I'm like, oh, that's perfect. That solves all my problems. So I don't know. Somehow things always work out. And I feel like it's magic. I feel it every time it happens. I feel like I've discovered magic. And that's what's so exciting to me is that often I don't have a finished plan. It just happens. Like I'll have a germ of an idea and then enough people. And that actually brings me to my next question for you. Thinking about collaboration, because one of the biggest sticking points for me is often that my ego gets in the way. I see something as like, oh, this is my art practice, and I have to like somehow put my name on it. And a few years ago, I decided, it was very intentional in throwing that out the window. I was like, it doesn't matter anymore. It will be a better result if it's everyone's project and we all co-own it, and I can really like work with as many people as possible. But that's a hard thing, and it's a hard thing as an artist to like. And I also think the art world isn't made for that. So I'm wondering, like in your pieces, because you have such intentional, pretty hands-on participation in a lot of the pieces, how do you view collaboration? Are the participants collaborators? Are they viewers with a task? Where's the line? I mean, I know it's a spectrum, but
yeah. Oh, it's a super, for me, it's a fascinating question. Yeah. Just by the way, can I ask you what was your feeling being inside Worktable, for instance? Did it cross your mind to ask yourself who the artist was in a way, or was that like, how would you say your relation to the author, so to speak?
I felt like I was in a very thought out art installation. I felt I could feel, I felt like I was participating in something much bigger, which was a good feeling. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I was trained for stage. I'm a stage animal, basically. I mean, I trained as a dancer, and I worked a lot as a performer. And my earlier work was really about performance and about stage. And when I made Worktable, one of the very first premises was this idea: I don't want anybody to be audience, and I don't want anyone to be performing. So I don't want anyone to be watching anybody else. If you're in there, then you're just doing something. It's just a lot of bodies in action without being self-conscious or being a watcher, let's say. and which was really a fantastic risk for me to take at the time, because I was, you know, I only knew how to make stage work. And I also don't have any training, let's say, in what I would say, yeah, a community situation or a social situation. So, and theatre is such a weird construction that we set up. I think it's a very beautiful one, but it's quite a weird construction, this idea of coming together and doing, watching, listening to something that somebody has proposed. So yeah, in terms of collaboration, the most recent piece that I made, well, I like this very gentle sense of collaboration that we talked about earlier, where you leave a problem for somebody else picks up your problem, you may never meet or get to talk about it. But in terms of relationship with the audience, I mean, the second piece I made that was participative, I don't like participative art situations very much.
Because it's like too much pressure, or you
very
would prefer just to be a passive viewer?
No, it's not that at all. I have very much enjoyed the ones that I've enjoyed, but I'm quite suspicious is maybe too strong of a word, but I'm reluctant. Like I see the mechanics quite clearly of and I am often surprised at how readily other people are like, yeah, we've been invited to participate, let's go. And I am often one of the slower audience members that hangs back and wants to know, yeah, but what are we really doing, and where is this leading, and am I comfortable with this really, and so on. So I mean, the whole reason I started doing it was making some interactive work is to see if I could make something that even I would trust and be interested to join. And the second piece I made like that was a bit by mistake. I was meant to make a duo, and the other performer was unable to continue with the work, and so it had to be a solo. And then I was like, I don't want to make this on my own. Okay, the audience is going to make it with me. We'll just do it together. Like, we're all here. Let's do the work together. And in this sense, I did ask people to really collaborate on making the work, but I think I think a lot about the fine line between a kind of guided chaos and I always really appreciate being invited into, I mean, I think there's just a massive difference between what I would call real participation, which happens in the real world and is community-based and is extremely messy and beautiful and difficult and has immediate real impact on people's lives that they will have to live with, you know, like that's what real participation is. It's political, social participation. And I think the theatre is a place where we practice all kinds of things, and we can make a fiction of them for a moment, and we can make a temporary community, and we can decide, okay, for the next 2 hours, let's get along, let's figure this out. And we won't have to sustain it beyond those 2 hours. And that's a kind of gift for a moment to see how that feels and see what it means in the moment. And I do believe that that has resonances in the outside world, but of course it's very different kind of participation. And I am I think in my work often in terms of how people relate to each other in the audience, one of my main things that I'm very happy about is if I manage to stimulate people to be curious about each other, which is often how I feel even when I sit in a let's say normal theater and I'm among 100, 200, 500 people sitting in the dark watching something. Often my mind wanders to like, who is around me, like who is here with me, because I think audiences communicate with each other very, very subtly but very effectively, just in the way they breathe, the way they laugh, the little noises they make when they move and so on. There's a lot of as stand-up comedians know very well, audiences mask themselves and they sort of find agreements among themselves briefly. And so I always find this a very subtle and almost animal kind of collaboration that audiences do, and that I find very interesting. But yeah, I guess what interests me is this sense of a temporary community that maybe becomes curious about itself, maybe wants to think about what the possibilities, but also the boundaries are of what we can do together. But it's very much a dreaming exercise. It's I also understand that it's not necessarily real world, and that's something I struggle with sometimes.
I love that though. It makes me want to do it. It makes me
Mm.
want to do projects on the stage or like that are temporary, because there are like most of my projects work in the real world, and there's just a lot more risk
Sure.
yeah, it's scary out there.
Yeah.
It'd
Yeah.
be nice. Like I actually could see a lot of value in doing some
Yeah.
of
These
you could really create a utopia for a moment.
for a moment. Yeah. And I think there's
Yeah.
definitely value in rehearsing those utopias and also making a space where one's imagination can go there without much fear, because again, if it doesn't work out, then we go, okay, wow, that was a disaster, but
Right.
we can stop because we've decided that there was a beginning and an end to this imagination exercise, and now
Yeah.
it's done. Yeah.
So with that, I was also curious about, do you often, when you're thinking about projects or performances, systems, do you often build them with the knowledge, maybe even with a plan of unbuilding them in the future, of their eventual destruction or disintegration?
While you were asking that question, I just thought of one important thing, but much more immediate, is that also, especially with interactive work, an important thing to me is that it's always possible for people to say no, and to or to withdraw their participation, or to
Yes.
leave, or just to sort of quietly at any moment kind of step back a bit, and not have, and that nothing relies on everyone's constant consent for it.
Right.
And this is
Part
really
of the
important to me.
safety and the feeling invited but not forced.
Yeah, exactly. And also also to understand that you can rely on others to carry the situation for a while, and take a moment to observe and to figure out for yourself what you feel about it, and then maybe decide to go back in again. And but that was a very short term, so that's sort of the destruction of the piece in real time. And of course, with interactive work, I'm always very interested when things sort of go wrong in a way, like not intentionally. There are times when I feel that there are people who are present who have brought some kind of other anger or something into the room, and would like to disrupt things in a different kind of way. But sometimes just something is slightly misunderstood, or things go a little awry, and this is always very fascinating because I think people feel that. Again, people feel quite clearly whether the people who are guiding or inviting, how much they need control, or how much they're actually quite interested when things start to slide a little bit, and it doesn't freak them out. They're just going, oh wow, okay, we're going here now. So those things, yeah. But in terms of I don't normally think about sort of what is it called, built-in obsolescence with my work. There are times when I become not so interested in it anymore, and not convinced that it's bringing what's needed at the moment, and then I'm ready to let it go. But other times it sort of gets its own life. I mean, Worktable is now 10 years old. I mean, it seems extraordinary that it's been running for so long. And I just watch with interest and see how it sustains.
Amazing.
I'm going to jump in. I hate almost honestly kind of interrupting this. You've had a wonderful dialogue over this time, and you started to actually, both of you began to answer this question. So please indulge and maybe dive a little deeper. Both of your works and your practice really involve this relationship building in many ways. And wondering what inspires you to really focus on that in your work, and if you have an end, like if there's a goal, a point at which you might move on from that theme in your work.
Yeah, I'll go ahead. And so I mean, I'm trained as a painter. That's like my background is in painting. And I got to the point where I felt like I had dug enough out of my own self and put it on canvas that I wasn't interested in my own story anymore. And I also it felt too, like I had too much control. And so getting to know other people and other stories, it's like, it's a never ending entertainment for me. It's like, you know, it's like, I'm so curious about other people and their experiences. And I think my goal with most of these projects is to learn enough and build enough with these people that then they can sustain whatever project that we built together if they're interested in it, or pass it on to someone else. And then I can go meet other people and build other things with them. So I don't think that there will be an end to that practice. At least I can't see it ending, because the world is big, and there's a lot of people that I want to meet and work with.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about relationship building, and I'm like, what else is there?
Yeah.
Of course, it feels very fundamental. I'm trying to think, what is my motivation? I'm not actually the most social person myself. So I guess there's a sort of very personal desire to try and understand humans and what the hell is going on around me, because it doesn't really feel that evident to me. But beyond that, I also, I think I'm very fascinated by relationships between strangers, and those moments where one doesn't know yet where a relationship could begin, or if it's possible or not, and this very amazing negotiation that humans do all the time about how they're going to relate with people that they don't know yet. There's one part of it, and another is that because relationships and what they look like and what they can be and so on we are socially trained for those possibilities. I think there's always a part of me that's curious, like, okay, but what else could there be? Like, what do we not know yet about relationships, or how could they be different to the way that we so far or currently know them? And of course, the options are wildly possible, and there's so many people that are practicing so many different ways of relating to each other. So, and it feels like also a politically really important thing to be open to those ways of experiencing each other and being in relation, and understanding what can feel good, and where these different kinds of relationships, where they lead to actually, like, and which brings us to lots of questions about power and so on and so on and so on. But and as we were just discussing before, I think in the arts field is where you can experiment and play with those experiences and learn about it.
Great. I think there's a great attachment to the two works you've had for our two versions of This Time Tomorrow, and relying very much on this relationship between people who may not know each other, but also multisensory experiences, and really embracing other sensations and other ways of communication besides verbal.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that people are very much connecting physically. Not right now. No, I mean that there's huge amounts of communication that is absolutely nonverbal, and that this is something that we can enjoy very much as well. It's happening anyway, and the more we feel it, I think the more we can enjoy it.
I have two questions specifically about Worktable from
yeah.
our audience. What happens to the objects once the project has finished at a location?
Yeah. Well, some of the objects move on to the next location. So every time we start in a new city, we need to have a full exhibition of or display of objects. So there is a traveling group of objects that have accumulated over the last 10 years from all over the world. And that's what is there in that room. And then slowly the local objects are added. So some of the locally made ones will also travel on with that group, but most of them won't. And it's a very difficult, I think, difficult, maybe is the wrong word, but it's emotionally affecting. We can spend a moment to sympathize with the person who has the job the day after work table closes, where it's necessary to break up stuff to be recycled where it can be, and a lot of it can't be recycled. So the piece does, it presses on this sore point that's about consumption, because it speeds up the cycle of consumption. I guess all of those objects at some point are going to end up in either recycling or landfill, but we speed up that process drastically by doing work table. But on the other hand, I one day my dream will come true, which was that all the objects could be sort of put into a giant shredding machine and kind of really returned to their atomic state, like that we would release all of these materials from their kind of what seems to me sometimes the burden of being objects for human use, and let them circulate more freely in the universe again. But anyway, this would be my desired outcome. Maybe one day it'll come true. But the other reason that the other thing that this brings to mind is that I try not to think of the final objects are extremely beautiful and very affecting. And I mean, I love spending time in the room where we see all those objects that people have put together. However, I don't think of them as being the outcome of the piece at all. For me, the work is entirely in the choices that people make, the things they think about while they're working, the successes and failures they have with the materials themselves and with the things they plan to do, and then what actually happens, and yeah, the relationship basically exactly that they form with the process. That is the work, and the object at the end is evidence of that, but it's for me it's not more than that. And very rarely people ask to take away their object. That's something that always interested me. It's almost never that someone wants to take it home. I think people intuitively understand that it's not necessary to hold on to the thing. It's done.
Yeah, I think, at least among my circle, I feel that, especially over the past year, as Cal was saying earlier, we've become, again, my circle, so much more experience-based as opposed to material-based. And to me, you know, I would agree, it feels like just the experience of being in that moment is what you need to hold on to, not the thing. Yeah. Kind of related to that, there are two questions very similar, and so I'll put them together. Have any objects ever been collected that you elected not to include in the project, feeling like it was too valuable or that its original function was still important?
Yeah.
And kind of the second part of that, has there ever been anything you've wanted to just keep as a part of your collection that people have brought?
Do you mean objects that are before they're taken apart, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, what happens is that there's a really specific list that I send, and I sent to Cincinnati, and then there's a very patient and someone with a lot of endurance who goes around looking for these objects and finding them at a price that's not that is possible, and so on. So, but it was very clear to me some things that could not be on the list, and they mainly. This is so subjective, and I become more and more aware of this, but I wanted everything everything that you see there that you can choose from to be mass made. So you really feel that it's an expression of a culture. It's not a person's individual expression. So I would never put an artwork, for instance, there, or anything that feels so artisanal that you feel like, oh wow, this is, yeah. So generally everything is very factory made or mass made, with the exception perhaps of the shell, which is one of the very mysterious kind of labor that went into that. But even the apple and the rose and so on, they're still industrial products, even though the workers involved are different. But so there was one thing, and also I didn't want anything that had too strong a religious or let's say, and here the cultural, what the hell does that mean? I wanted things to relate to the mainstream culture of the place where the piece is, let's say. So when it plays in Japan, there are some things that are like specifically Japanese there, and that they go into the exhibition, and so into the object list. But otherwise, anything that feels that it's been sort of collected from overseas, from another culture, and used as a display purpose and so on, I don't want to put these kinds of things in. So that might answer that question about things that don't go in. But one of the, I mean, people see value in very different ways. So sometimes the person that sees the brand new sneaker, you know, the sports shoe that's never been used, and they're like, how can you do that? That's terrible. It hasn't even been used yet, and it's already been taken apart. They see the value there. Other people, they see the very old encyclopedia, and they're like, this is impossible. This is too much history in one place, and so on. Or somebody else might see the record, you know, the LP record, and they immediately think it's politically impossible to destroy things like records and books and so on. This has got too much bad history in terms of and so on. So people have very different sensitivities that I'm aware of, and I know that they are we're working with those. I mean, it's quite a hot area, and we all make our own choices there. However, when the person is collecting objects in the local city, one of the things I tell them is, if you find an object and you love it and you would love to take it home and live with it, then it's got to be in work table. That's one of the golden rules. It means that it's really going to be a really interesting object for someone to take apart. I used to do all the shopping myself. Like, I think we've been to like 45 cities now, and I think at least the first 5 or more cities I did all the shopping, you know, at flea markets and so on. And it does become traumatizing after a while. I mean, I had to give it up because it was a bit too difficult. But one thing, and last thing in my rant, I know we have to close up, but one thing I love about it as a consumer is that it puts you in situations where you might be standing in a shop, for instance, and instead of looking around the objects and thinking like, is this good value for money, or will this make me look good when I buy it, or how long will it last? You're looking at everything thinking, how would it feel to destroy that? Like, how would it feel to take that apart? Would it be interesting to just like, and it was really fascinating how it retrained my consumer brain. And I suddenly became aware of how strictly I'd been taught to think about being a consumer, and to sort of disturb that was very liberating. It also meant that I just stopped buying things also for myself. It also really, it definitely reduced my desire to buy anything really.
It's a great answer. And I love the idea of feeling like if you feel you need to have it, it definitely goes in. So first off, thank you so much, Cal and Kate, for letting us just listen in on your conversation today. I know it had my mind going, and I actually texted Drew every question I began to write down. You just flowed right into the answer, which made my job a lot harder, I have to say, but was just really delightful just to hear you talk about your practice, both of you, and you know what your interests are and where you're going to be going. So thank you so much for doing that with us today. And thank you to our audience too for just taking part and being engaged with This Time Tomorrow. We really appreciate you. A couple of just quick notes for you before you head off today. If you are interested and can get down to Sawyer Point, we do have some sessions left for Letters from Attica at 2 o'clock. So if you get downtown, you know, go ahead and register for that. But I really want to let you know that we have sessions open for a work table today and throughout the weekend. So go to the CAC website. You can check out our social media, our Facebook event pages, and figure out how to sign up for those things. And I want to invite you all back for the next Goethe Institute, which will be actually in person tomorrow. Something in person in the CAC lobby between MoveX and Crystal Howard. And I highly encourage you to register for this because the For the Love of Black Women is all sold out. So the only way you're going to find some entry into this is by coming in to see that Goethe Institute. So I hope you all have a great day. And thanks again, Cal and Kate. We'll see you soon.
Thanks so
Shoni.
much.
Thank you, Cal. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great meeting you. Bye.
You too. Ciao.